Do you remember a movie from the 90s with Robin Williams where he was working in a children's hospital? I think the name of the movie is Patch Adams. And basically, he would act like a clown, make them laugh, and act funny and do all these clownish activities. But he had such a massive impact on the recovery rate. Like so many more kids were recovering.
Imagine you're in an ocean and you're on a dinghy boat. Storm comes through, it's going to flip your boat, no matter what, because you're on a dinghy boat. Whatever you do, you're going to capsize. But if you complain about it, you're going to start blaming the ocean for everything. You will say, I'm going to change this dinghy and get a luxury ship. In a section called Proverbs, there is a statement that says, a merry heart doeth good like a medic.
Greetings, seekers of ancient wisdom. So, in today's episode, we're talking about one of the oldest forms of medicine. You guessed it, laughter. Actually, you probably didn't guess it. But we've got a stand up comedian on our show today to talk about this interesting topic. VijeV, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deepak. And as you know, I often call him Deepak Chopra. That's one of my comedic things because, he reminds me of Deepak Chopra. But actually, this man is Indigo Jedi. And I met him quite a few years ago doing all kinds of stuff completely different from what we're learning today. But hey, that's how life is. You start from one thing and you become another and you evolve. And the evolution of me has been comedy. Deepak, do you know why people say laughter is the best medicine?
I guess when you laugh, you actually feel good, right? I don't know, you laugh and your body relaxes, I think, because to have a good hearty laugh, you need to actually fully relax and all the tension is gone, anxiety, and you actually forget about those things and you have a
Well, here's what I know. I mean, that's why I asked you to see if people actually understand where it comes from. It also related to when people say it takes less muscles to smile than to frown. Yeah, so it's all related. It's just that your body relaxes, it uses less energy, you're more in the flow. When you're laughing, it's almost like water. You connect with the world a little bit better. But laughter is one way to get people in the middle and at least compromise and negotiate about what's going on. And that's what laughter is known as the best medicine. In fact, I was looking at that statement. Do you know where it comes from?
laughter is the best medicine. You know, the first time I came across that statement was in the Reader's Digest. Back in the 90s, there was a small little A5 size booklet called the Reader's Digest, and they would have a couple of articles in there. And sprinkled in between the articles, which were about public issues or some stuff happening around the world or some celebrity. But sprinkled in between would be a couple of joke pages, and one of the joke pages was called "Laughter is the Best Medicine." So that's where I came across it. But I've heard it so many times over the years, and I'd love to know the history of that phrase.
Well, it turns out it comes from the Bible. In a section called Proverbs, there is a statement that says, a merry heart doeth good like a medic. A merry heart doeth good like a medic, which in translation means laughter is the best medicine. And ever since then, I absolutely agree. It is the greatest form of inner connection. It's also the greatest form of connecting with other human beings when things are humorous. That's the way to do it. And that's why I use humor, stand-up comedy, and all kinds of comedy, whether it's a written comedy, whether it's you're watching Seinfeld on TV, whether you watch Friends, whether you go see a show, whether it's a musical. Anytime there's humor, people relax. And I was even thinking the other day, so many jokes everywhere, and as you know, trying to be a comedian, people might say, but how do they take you seriously? Do people take you seriously if you do comedy? And I said, well, if you need to be serious to be taken seriously, there's already a problem. Why are you trying to be serious? And I thought all of this is related to Western culture, actually. In Eastern culture, heroes are very comical.
Chinese movies that we used to watch in the 90s, the hero was a there was like a bit of slapstick humor to his character, right? So he would fumble and do stupid things and say silly things, and but he would still be a supreme martial artist and be able to defeat all his adversaries, in a few single shots. But you're right, I remember that.
He or she, depending on the kind of heroes they are in Eastern culture, they click into gear and they become superheroes and they fight. But when they relax, they're being comical. But in Western culture, in order to preserve the hero nature of the person, they have to be silent and very, very like thought out, deep, and silent. The silent, you know. And that's the kind of hero people got used to, and they think, oh, I have to be like that if I want to be taken seriously. And I think that's the way it's coming from. Even in Indian movies, like the one of the best heroes ever is Rajinikanth, the Indian Chuck Norris, right? Absolutely humorous guy, and he was one of the best heroes, best known heroes in that part of the country. That is for me is an example of being a hero, but also being humorous because people like you for it. But let me ask you though, what do you think is the world's first joke ever told?
The oldest joke is, why did the chicken cross the road?
That's a joke that I know of. Yes, that's the one I heard first. Because I would think, what's the oldest joke that is really common in culture? It's probably that one. It might even be knock knock jokes. Like, we've always heard these knock knock jokes so many times. That must be really, really early. And some say it might be Jehovah's Witnesses who probably created that joke. I don't know, because they keep knocking on your door, asking you about Jehovah's Witness. So I'm thinking they might have been the first people to do that. Who knows? But apparently, the world oldest joke dates back to 1900 BC. And it was the Sumerians themselves in a region basically where uh, southern Iraq is, right? That's the ancient Sumeria. And the joke says, something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. I don't know. Is that a
Is
joke? Do
that
you
the
think
whole
that's
joke?
funny? That's apparently the whole joke. Let me read that again, okay?
Yeah,
Well,
please
it
do.
is it is translated, so of course the nuance of the joke, the cultural connection with the joke is missing, because I mean, I guess you got to be there. Very often people say you got to be there to know it's funny, right? So this is what the translation is: something which has never occurred since time immemorial. A young woman did not fart in her husband's lap. That's the
Interesting.
joke.
I guess humor says a lot about the culture as well, of the time and what people find
Mm,
funny. And I guess humor does sort of
yeah,
change over time and decades. Maybe stuff that was funny in the '60s is not so funny now. Do you think that happens, or do you think
it
some
happens
humor is
much faster than you
timeless?
think. Oh,
Okay,
it happens faster than you think. Every decade or so, there's some sort of transition of humor that happens. And there are certain comedians who have been in the limelight in the 60s become irrelevant in the 70s and 80s because their comedy relied on old thought, status quo that society thought was normal, but then grew out of and changed and transitioned. For example, the racist humor that used to exist that was very funny amongst people, but people then found it to be completely insensitive and downright wrong. Then there's xenophobic languages. Then there's people talking about different race and cultures, people talking about gender identity, people talking about sexuality, and how people have become more sensitive, but also they understand that that is no longer funny. It is actually derogatory. Like there were jokes about people who are on wheelchairs or people who are blind. Very insensitive comedy because at that time there was no social media or people looking at it and saying, hey, this guy is being completely rude and irrelevant and not funny at all. So a lot of comedians who've been famous made good money. I mean, popular within 10 years, disappearing because their comedy were, became irrelevant. In fact, if you look at the ancient jokes that the Romans used to make, they would make fun of how they would pillage and destroy cities, how women and children were killed, and how many children were, they would keep count and make jokes about it while having their wine and grapes or whatever the Romans enjoyed using. Imagine making those jokes now. You would sound like a complete uh, barbarian, a barbaric time that we used to live in. And it was humorous at that time. So as humans become better, more loving, more connected, more understanding of our differences, our humor has changed along. So that's why humor today, a good comedian that connects without that type of basis, because very often the old comedians say, I can't make jokes like I used to. What they're trying to say is, I can't get away with those jokes anymore. I can't get away with it. That's what they're really referring to, right? It doesn't mean that they have the freedom. They have the freedom. It's just that making jokes like that is no longer tolerated. So things are changing. So good comedians know how to read the room, understand culture, and go with it. In fact, I'll give you a great example. I'm Sri Lankan. That's where I was born, but I grew up in South Africa. And one of my experiences in South Africa was the braai. Braai is a common pastime in the South African culture, and something that all South Africans, even Indians who just got off the boat and started living in South Africa, or anyone else for that matter, will learn about the braais in a matter of a few months. And they will start doing it. They'll realize, oh, this is actually a very nice cultural event. So they will start having braais. And one of the things I learned was going to a braai in another culture, and I learned about how they braai. And that was actually one of the funniest things that I've experienced, which became a viral hit on my social media because it really connected and resonated with so many people, because it's a common thing people experience with that type of braai.
The hit that you're talking about was, I think you mentioned how late the braais start, which means how late they actually start cooking the meat. So people would come, say maybe 5 o'clock in the evening for dinner time, but they would actually only start cooking the meat maybe at midnight. So maybe when you dissect it a bit, it's actually another thing I've heard a lot about jokes, or another saying, a famous saying, is like a lot of truth is said in jest, which means a lot of truth is said in humor, and this is exactly that. So you're pointing out this truthful thing, which is normally if you go to a traditional braai, uh, they'll only start cooking the meat at midnight, and that is a truthful fact. I mean, it's factual. It happens very often that it's almost taken to be factual, but you're saying it in a joke, and people find that funny. And I think that's a very common type of humor, wouldn't you say?
Very common type of humor. In fact, the best kind of humor is where I'm able to tell you about my culture, even if you never heard of it, but you will find it funny because I'm able to communicate and tell you about it in my way so that you can understand it. Right? There is a joke, right? When we were growing up, because we used to be engineers in university, right? Learning about engineering, and that was my whole life. And they would often say that an engineer is someone who takes something very simple and tries to explain it in such a way that no one can understand it.
So I had to just think about that. So basically, you make it more complicated for us. So something that's simple, the engineers make it make it so the layman doesn't understand, so that we need to employ the engineers to decipher it again.
Yes, exactly. You have to employ more engineers. So basically, a bad engineer is the kind of guy who takes something simple in the world and then explains it in such a way that no one can understand it. So that's a bad engineer. That's a joke that amongst the engineering crowd we learn about, right? And then there's the jokes between cultures. I mean, I'm sure if you're a footballer, my son is learning about football and he's watching football, he'll make jokes because he's a Manchester United fan. So he'll make jokes about Liverpool fans, and Liverpool fans making jokes about the Manchester United fans. And there's a whole jest between clubs, the rivalry between football clubs, and the comedy, when done in jest, is actually quite funny, and it's actually very, very humorous for one thing, and it's not serious at all. It's like there's no wars that begin. There's no conflicts. It's just in jest. It's done between clubs. It's like, hey, you play rugby like this, or cricket. You might have seen the cricket, India versus Pakistan, the cultural mix between the two, and because of how those two nations were formed many years ago, and because they're both cricket-loving nations, they have jokes between themselves about the way they play cricket because of the cultural difference, and that is something that you, I'm sure you must have heard of. Jokes about Pakistan, and Pakistan making jokes about India, and things like that. And that's another cultural thing. Look at South Africa. Great example is the cultural differences between the traditional white guys who are Eurocentric versus Africans who have more sort of African roots, and they'll make jokes between themselves as to what it's like being a white guy here versus being a black person here. And then the Indians are stuck in the middle. It's like, you guys, I have to manage both of you now, you know? So that's the kind of joke that we'll also hear.
Yeah, no, I love that. So that's the cultural sort of twist that most of jokes, or a lot of jokes, can have. So I wanted to bring the jokes a little bit back to healthcare and wellness. Do you remember a movie from the 90s with Robin Williams where he was working in a children's hospital? I think the name of the movie is Patch Adams. And basically, he would act like a clown. He was a doctor, but he was looking after a children's ward, and he would make them laugh and act funny and do all these clownish activities. And he had such a huge impact on them and such a huge success. I mean, these would be terminally ill children, kids that were like suffering from cancers and other terminal illness. But he had such a massive impact on the recovery rate. Like so many more kids were recovering. It became such a famous story. They obviously made a Hollywood movie out of it. But there really is some science behind laughter being a type of medicine. It's not just a phrase. It's not just a catchphrase. It's not just something that comedians use as a trick to get people to come and watch their shows. There really is a real scientific thing that happens in the body with laughter and and being well and healthcare. I mean, we see it with so many examples.
The doctors call it the placebo effect, where people are complaining about a lot of problems and they would actually try and test and see if it's actually in their mind psychologically or if they have a real issue. They would give them fake medicine and say, this is going to help you with your headaches or something, and they will take it. And they say, hey, I'm feeling better. Thank you so much. And it turns out it was in their minds because it was placebo. It's sort of like that when it's in your mind, like when you have a certain state of mind, and if you bring humor into it, it has the same impact where it actually brings down a lot of things like your cortisol levels, like your stress levels, anything that is causing tension and harm within yourself, anxiety. It brings it down and you're thinking more sort of in the present tense, where you are being in the moment. That's basically what humor does, is that when you have anxiety or you thinking about the past again or the future, as soon as there's a joke, you're concentrating on the joke and the effect of it, and the laughter immediately brings you to the present. And that's why it heals, because most of the things we do, healers will tell you, bring your mind in the present. When you meditate, when you do anything, if you bring it to the present, you have all the chance in the world of understanding yourself better in the present, but also being able to heal. And humor is doing that automatically. And that's why it's healing. It's bringing your mind to the presence, which is why I love jokes, man. Jokes is how you get people. I was actually using comedy to actually attract people to this pub because people weren't going there. This manager was saying, we need more people here. And I said, why don't you try comedy? So you run a show and you give them some specials, get them to laugh, because I had monstrous issues in that pub. People were saying, no, I don't want, I feel sad. I don't want to laugh. I just want to drink. Those were what the people were saying while I would ask them to come join them, come join us in the show. I would basically go around the tables and say, would you like to join us in the show? That's what I was hearing. I'm sad. I don't want to, I don't want to engage. Another one in another location, she was at the show and then she was sitting outside with a glass of wine. And I said, hey, would you like to come in? And said, no, I can't. I need to drink. So people are going through a lot of stuff and they might not be in the presence to have any jokes because, I mean, if you're going through something, a loss, grief, how could you possibly do it? So maybe you can help me. Maybe you can help me as a guru. How do I talk to that person and tell them that before the jokes start, what could you tell them to say, come and join us so that you can feel relief and heal and feel better about yourself? What would you do?
I think I would tell them to watch this podcast so they know why laughter is such a good medicine. And hopefully, then they'll be convinced to come and join your show. But I wanted to touch on something that you raised, and we'll close off the show. You mentioned when we were talking beforehand that it can actually help in trauma cases. And this is, I think, very relevant. Today, we have a lot of traumatic, um, or we have a lot of people who've experienced trauma that are now carrying it forward in their lives, and it's usually depression and mental issues and bipolar issues. And can laughter help in those type of cases?
Trauma is the kind of thing that lingers on. It reminds me of something that I read. When a nuclear bomb goes off, once the damage is done, the radioactive waste lingers on. The fallout, it's called the nuclear fallout, and it lasts for years, right? Trauma is like that. One singular event happens and it's done. But the fallout of it lingers on for a long time. And the reason why it lingers on is many of us are not equipped to handle trauma. We are not equipped to transition and heal from the process. But worst of all is that we don't know how to acknowledge it. We don't know how to actually understand that we are actually going through it. We assume that what we're experiencing is normal. It's a protective behavior. It's a behavior where you try and defend yourself as much as you can because you've been hurt and you might get hurt again. So you need to be on your toes and be alert. So that obviously causes a state of panic and you're constantly looking over your shoulder. When you don't acknowledge it and understand that you're in it, that's a problem. And I feel, from my personal experience, is that the issue is not change. People understand change, people know what change is. The problem is people don't know how to transition to go from that state to a state of balance. They don't know how to. Because by going through it means having to acknowledge that pain, having to relive it, having to understand it, acknowledge it, learn about it, understand that you were in it and it happened to you, and you need to understand it and be at peace with it. And humor is the one thing that can allow you to go through that in the most easiest, simplest way possible, that it'll carry you through. Imagine you're in an ocean and you're on a dinghy boat. Storm comes through, it's going to flip your boat, no matter what, because you're on a dinghy boat. Whatever you do, you're going to capsize. But if you complain about it, you're going to start blaming the ocean for everything. Damn these storms. I wish there was no storms and then I'll be at peace. But if you acknowledge that storms will always happen no matter what you will do is you focus on your dinghy that you're in. You will say, I'm going to change this dinghy and get a luxury ship. I'm going to make sure that it's got pressure points and it's got shocks and absorbers but a luxury ship with all the systems in place is relatively stable. It can actually handle it, and you can actually go and swim in the pool in the ship while there might be a storm outside. You might not even know until you actually walk outside and see it. And that's essentially what humor is. Humor is like building your ship, and it allows you to have a stronger ship so you can handle the storm a bit better. And as you can handle it a bit better, you can handle your journey a bit better. And that's what humor is, by allowing you to understand your trauma and heal.
That is so well put, and I hope people can resonate with that. VGV, so we've come to the end of our show. We really enjoyed it. I hope people have learned. I certainly have learned a lot about using laughter. But if people want to know more about VGV, the comedian, tell us how they can learn more about you.
Absolutely. I have few shows here and there. Upcoming shows will be on my website, vijv.com. That's where you're going to find my profile. Yes, you'll find marketing material there as well because I do marketing and I use humor in my marketing. So if you want to learn about how to use comedy in your business, I mean, I've been battling with Indigo Jedi with all kinds of humor about his beard. If you guys all know about the famous beard, there we go, magnificent beard. I would use that as a little trait with the jokes that we do. That's the whole point, is using humor in understanding what you do and being able to communicate. You can also come see my shows. It's also on the website. And also I write short stories that I'm building to be something bigger. It's a reflection of my humor, but also my area of expertise, I should say. One thing I enjoy, one thing that I always loved is science fiction. So I combine the two together and I write some stories called Caldopia. You can also find that on the website. And yeah, thank you so much, Indigo Jedi, for this chat.
VGV, I really appreciate it. So, guys, I'm going to leave all those details below the video. Check it out and check you guys on the next video.